Okay, so let's start. So, good evening again. And today's topic we are going to look at project stakeholders management. Project stakeholders management. How do we manage the stakeholders in our project? You know, when we talk about stakeholders management in project, there are some few questions sometimes we often ask ourselves. Is it possible to satisfy all the stakeholders that you have on your project? How important are the project stakeholders to your project? And also, what do you do with your project stakeholders? Sometimes these are the things that we often look at. But you know that the discussion of stakeholders, the last time we looked at that discussion, we said that stakeholder can be defined or can be seen or refers to as anyone, which could be an individual or an organization or a person whose interest may be positively or negatively impacted by the project. So it therefore means that for every stakeholder in a project, it is possible that their interest has been impacted either positively or negatively. So which means as a project manager, you must also consider all those stakeholders you have in your project that have been impacted what negatively. All right. If for instance you are building an automation system for a company, and technically that automation system will definitely reduce the staff number or in that department that will make use of that system, then those staff members that will be affected, automatically you must also take note of them as what stakeholders, because they will be negatively what impacted. So that is the definition of stakeholder. Then now, when we now look at stakeholders management, stakeholder management is now all encompassing, which simply means we are going to make sure we identify all the possible stakeholders from the beginning. And when we identify all these possible stakeholders from the beginning, we're also going to ensure by analyzing to see their expectations. What do they need in this project? What are they looking forward to in this project? As a project manager, is it important you take note of those expectations? Yes, 100% important you take note of those expectations. Why? Because it is necessary when you are collecting your requirement from those stakeholders. So it is expected as a project manager you have an idea, a broader view of what each and everyone in that project expects from that particular project. And that is what stakeholder management is all about. So if you look at the whole scenario of stakeholder management, you can see that first you begin with the process of getting to know who are my stakeholders. Who are the people that will make use of this project? Who are the people that will be affected by this project? Who are the people that will be impacted by the solution or the end result of this project? So those set of people must be identified at the beginning while discussing the project. Why do we need to identify them? So that it will ease your planning for each of those stakeholders on how to engage them continuously in that particular project. So that is the summary of project stakeholder management. So you can see that the first part of the stakeholder management in a project, you get to actually know who are the people or group of organizations, either they are internal or external to the project. You must take note of them and put them in your documentation, so that you get to know who they are. And when you have known who they are, you are to analyze their expectation, what their needs are, what they want to achieve through the project. It must be documented. The reason I said, so that you can effectively engage them, so that you can effectively engage all the stakeholders in your project. Okay, so let's move on. So we can now say that stakeholder management focuses on continuous communication. So that is why there is no way you want to engage your stakeholder. If you look at the word engage, simply means discuss, have a rapport, find out, reach out. So stakeholders management has to do with continuous engagement with all your stakeholders. If you had gone through the video of communication in our last class, we said that when we're discussing communication management, we said that the project is seen as an entity. And because the project is seen as an entity, the project manager stands in between the project and the stakeholder. So which means which means the stakeholder, which means the project manager communicates to the project, and from the project also communicate back to the stakeholder. So if the stakeholders have information to share with the project manager, they discuss with the project manager take that information and distribute it and share it with the project, or implement it in the project. Exactly the same. So that continuous engagement with the project has to do with what? Communication. So there is no way you can have a proper stakeholder management without having a communication plan. So that is the key. So that is why if you look at communication management and stakeholder management, they are interwoven, because that is your expectation regarding any of your stakeholders. There's no way you can say, oh, I want to manage my stakeholder, get to know their needs, identify all of them, without communicating with each and every one of them. So technically, you will have to what? Communicate with all your stakeholders. That is what? Stakeholders or management. So you can see on the screen, we said that stakeholder management focuses on continuous communication with what? Stakeholders. So if we said that it's focused on continuous communication with stakeholder, then what is the purpose of that communication? What do we want to achieve by that communication? What are we looking at by that communication? That is exactly what we are discussing. The stakeholder communication is key. Now, if we have our stakeholders have communication on a regular basis, then what exactly do they need to communicate with the stakeholder? So if I paraphrase that question, you as the project manager, what do you actually need to communicate with your stakeholder? Because we said that stakeholder management focuses on continuous communication with your stakeholder. So what do you need to communicate? Number one, you are communicating with them so that you can have a better understanding of their needs and expectation. Number one, you can see. Number two, address issues as they occur with the stakeholders. All these are reasons why you are communicating with them. And also in situations whereby there is conflict of interest with any of your stakeholder, then you are able to manage that communication line regarding conflict of interest. Now, I hope you can hear me. Joe, can you hear me? All right. Now, let me quickly talk about managing conflict of interest. For instance, just this week that ended, we were trying to deploy an application and a device. All right. Company A have the device. Company B have the application. And I'm the one managing those two companies so that we can deploy to a third party, who is another organization. Now, the third party do not understand the business or the relationship that exists between company A and company B. But the third party just wants his business to work fine. Now, in the concept of managing conflict of interest, now this is it. Company A, who have the device, company B have the application. Now, when deployment was taking place in the third party organization who owns the business now, they discovered that the device is not working fine, is not charging properly. So in that situation that the device is not working fine, you know that automatically affect the company's B application. So company A has its own stakeholder which will be communicated to. Company B have its own stakeholder which will be communicated to. Now, company B, who has the application that is already working fine, and company A, who have the device that is not powering up because it's not charging properly, it will affect the third party's business. Now, who will the third party report to? Technically, the third party will say the application or whatever has been provided is not working. So you see that between this company A and company B, there's conflict of interest. Why? Because company A application is working perfectly, and that is his own focus. He doesn't care if companies A device is not doing well, and company A is focused on ensuring that the device that is deploying for the application should be powered up. So you can see these two different stakeholders from two different organizations. There is conflict of interest because company A is focusing on the device, company B is focusing on the application, and now the third party, the organization who is the customer, is complaining that it's not working. So company A and company B will be at a head battle because both of them have collaborated together to run a service for company, the third party organization. So you can see that the company B, who has the application, is blaming company A for not giving them the right devices that can power up. That is what conflict of interest. So as the project manager, the reason why you are engaging or having a continuous discussion with your stakeholder is to so that you can understand their needs and expectations. So you can see that you may be having a project that have to do with three different companies together. Each of those different companies, you must understand their needs and expectations. Who are the key people in those organizations? Who are the major principal officers in those organizations? You must know them. Addressing issues as they occur. So all these are the reason why there must be what continuous communication with those stakeholders. All right? Because there is no way we can talk about engaging your stakeholder without discussing the issue of effective communication. So which means there must be a consistent collaboration, a consistent discussion, a consistent make-up regarding all the necessary information that needs to be passed from one stakeholder to the other stakeholder so that this engagement can provide or produce a satisfactory decision. So let's look at the project management processes that needs to be followed. Now, before we look at the project management processes, when we talk about continuous communication or continuous engagement of your stakeholder, please take note what your expectations should be as a project manager is that you are expected to build a good working relationship with each of your stakeholders to ensure effective and efficient engagement throughout the project. Take note, if your relationship with each of those stakeholders is not effective, if it is not built properly, it will affect the support you will get from each of those stakeholders. And that is why it is very important that those stakeholders are effectively what? Engaged. Now let's look at the project management process. So what do I need to do when you are discussing this issue of stakeholders management? When we need to manage our stakeholder, there are just basic 4 processes that I must follow as a project manager. The first process is identify your stakeholders. Who are the people that have interest in this project? You see that this process of identifying your stakeholder is done at the initiation stage of the project, which means that at the early stage of your project, where we are still discussing about all the documentations. Okay, this is what the project is, the project charter, they are still telling you about the scope of work. Now no document have been signed yet and all those things. The moment the document is signed, the second thing that is done at the initiation stage, apart from the documentation, is identifying your stakeholder. So which means at the beginning of every new project, it is expected you have a project charter, which is the official document for the project, for managing the project. The number 2 things you must do at the beginning stage of the project is to identify all your key stakeholders. So what is that is that then planned stakeholder management is done during planning stage. Manage stakeholder engagement is done during executing. Monitoring stakeholders engagement is done during monitoring and controlling. So let's quickly look at them one after the other for proper understanding. What do we mean when we say identify stakeholders? And is it possible to identify all stakeholders in the project? And how often should we identify stakeholders in the project? Please listen to this question. Yes, it is possible. Yes, it is possible to identify all your stakeholders in the project. But take note, stakeholders identification starts at the early stage of the project, which is at the initiation stage. But is that the only stage you should identify stakeholder? No. Please take note, which means stakeholder identification in the project is continuous. So which means, you know that word, they say soldier go, soldier come, barrack remain. So which means stakeholder identification is continuous in the sense that it is possible you started the project with 2 or 4 stakeholders. Then as the project continue, you brought in some new people to help you do some other requirements in the project. Now, those new people you are going to bring, you are going to identify them. So at each time, let's say for instance, you are doing a building project, all right? At the time of doing foundation of the project, you have all your stakeholder well planned out. You've identified the aboki that will do the digging. You have identified, let's say you are using aboki for example, you have identified everybody. Do you know that the moment the aboki are done, they are done in that project, so they can step out. So which means a time will come in your project whereby you need maybe a new set of stakeholders, or maybe you are bringing in an electrician, or you are bringing in a plumber, you are bringing in anybody that was not part in the beginning, which means identification will have to start all over again. So take note, identification of stakeholder is continuous in the project. So there is no particular time that, oh, it is only at initiation you should identify stakeholder. But it is always very important and wise as a project manager that as much as possible, identify all your stakeholders from the beginning. Not because it is only at that beginning stage you should identify stakeholder, but because you want to carry everybody along as possible from the beginning of the project. Excuse me, what is the danger of not carrying everybody along or not identifying everybody? The danger is that as the project continues, you will not get the necessary support. When we mean support, not that they are going to give you money, like give you money, but when we mean support in this case, we are saying a situation whereby you are sending mail and you need the third party to respond. But because you are not carrying them along, he may not know that you sent me. Maybe he will be expecting you should call. Or maybe because you are not in good communication term, he may not even read it. So that is why at the beginning, you must carry everybody along. Now, take note, I've seen somebody that I'm working currently with as a stakeholder, that even if I send him a mail, I will still go and meet him one-on-one to tell him because he have the attitude of not opening mail to check. So in such a case, you have to carry them along so that you will not be, because now when the project goes bad, you are the one they will blame. They will not blame that the guy did not respond to me. They will ask you, okay, now you notice he wasn't respond to the mail. What did you do next? So that is I don't know if you understand me, Joe. All right. So, all right. So that is the key or how important it is to identify all your stakeholders. I remember a project and that was done 2 years ago. A particular client of ours, all right, have a friend that was managing the project for him. All right. So the project was going on fine. The project manager was like a family friend to the the family that owns the building project. So they were constructing a duplex. So because he's related or he has a close relationship with the owner of the project, so he was always discussing with the man. He was constantly what? Discussing with the man. But something happened along the line while they were discussing. So while they were discussing along the line, something happened. What happened? So the man was called to come and validate the project. All right. That come and check what we've done so far and give your recommendation. Not knowing, now send the man now sent the wife. Remember, the family friend project manager has been relating with the man alone. He now sent the wife. Say, yeah, only the project manager said you should come and check that is done. So okay. So the wife now went to go and check what has been done in the project site. On getting there, being a woman, you check the sitting room and you say, oh, the sitting room is okay. The next point of call was to check the kitchen. When he got to the kitchen, he asked the project manager, who gave you the kitchen design? The project manager was looking. He said, who did you tell that you need a kitchen design? Why do you make this kitchen so small? Why is this one here? Why is this there? Why is this there? It should be like this and like this and like that and like that. So the project manager was looking. Immediately the woman picked up his phone and called the husband and said, I don't think we can accept what has been done. The kitchen is too small for my liking. And who do you take permission from? Are you the one that want to cook in the kitchen? Why didn't you tell me about the need of what you need to do in the kitchen? I can't accept this kitchen. And that was how the owner of the project have to call the project manager to fix it. Now, you look at that story, it looks something simple. But imagine you have already completed a kitchen project, a kitchen in a building, and they are telling you that they don't want that kitchen design. They want you to refix it, they want you to expand it. You can see the lot of work and energy, the implication. So that is how bad or terrible it may look like when a stakeholder is not identified or carried along at the beginning stage of the project. So take note, any stakeholder that you miss out at your identification stage of your project can have great impact in your project. That is why, as much as possible, identify all your stakeholders. Remember, you see now I'm taking time on this place because this is the key in managing your stakeholders. If you can identify all those stakeholders in your project, then you have done a great deal. because all those stakeholders, they have interest, and they can influence your project to have a success, and they can also influence it to have a failure. All right, so that is why you must identify as much as possible so that you can easily carry all your stakeholders along in the project from the beginning. So identifying your stakeholder is simply saying find out who are the people, group of organizations, or different organizations that will be impacted by the project or the project outcome, or is interest they are impacted. So you must find out those people because they have a way of implement affecting your project. So what is the key benefit of identifying your stakeholder is that it allows the project manager to identify the appropriate focus for each stakeholders or group of stakeholders. So what does that mean? When you now identify all your stakeholders, it now gives you the opportunity to actually beam your light to, oh, out of all these stakeholders that I have identified, which of them is the key stakeholders? Which of them has the decision power? Which of them have greater influence? That is the importance. Just like the example I cited, the friend or the project manager that is a family friend did not recognize that the wife, the mother, or the sponsor's wife may take it personal. Why? Because that was neglected, and that is how important it is. Please take note of that. Now, when all stakeholders are identified, what do you do when you are identifying your stakeholders? Please take note. Is it that you just identify them by, oh, you are a stakeholder number one, you are a stakeholder number? No. Identifying your stakeholder is getting to know their names. Remember, when we're discussing stakeholder management, we said you have to, the purpose of continuous engagement is to first you know them and know what their needs and expectation will be. All right. So identifying your stakeholder first and foremost is to know their names, their departments, and their level of interest in the project. So identification of stakeholder is focused on getting to know the names of all the stakeholders, know their departments, their positions, their phone number, their address, their email, everything that you need to know about the stakeholders, you need to have all of them. And where will you document them? You document them in your stakeholders register. So stakeholders register is a project document that contains all the names of your identified stakeholders for a particular project. All the names and details, let me not use the word names, all the names and details of each of the stakeholders that you have identified for the project. So that is where you have your stakeholders register. So you can see that at the identification stage of your project, you can see change request as an output, which means at the beginning you can identify 20 stakeholders. As time goes on, they are done, they move on. Yes, you can identify more. So which means there's room to keep identifying stakeholders right from the beginning to the end of the project. That is it. And now, what are the different techniques that can be used to identify stakeholders? You can see them here. Expert judgment. You can ask the sponsor, excuse me, sir, who are your key stakeholders for this project? Who can I discuss with? The sponsor can say, okay, apart from me, you can discuss with Wale, you can discuss with Tunde, you can discuss with Debo. All right, those are the key. So which means expert judgment can help you identify the key stakeholder. Or you do data gathering techniques. You yourself, you go on interview. You get to interview everybody in the organization, or you do a questionnaire or survey so that you can easily get to identify all the key stakeholders you have in your project. Or you can have a meeting, you can see meeting here, you can have a group meeting with everybody to actually know who are the key stakeholders in your project. Now, when I have identified the stakeholders, What do I do with those stakeholders? There's what we call stakeholders analysis. What is stakeholders analysis? Stakeholders analysis is that technique that is used to gather all the stakeholders to find out their interests. That is what stakeholders analysis. All right. So stakeholder analysis is a technique that is used to gather. So it's a technique that is used to gather all the stakeholders to find out their interests throughout the project. So how do we analyze our stakeholders? The first thing we do when we are analyzing our stakeholder, the first thing is that you identify them. Yes, which is good. You have find out their roles, their department, their expectations, their knowledge. You have gathered the informations you need to gather about the stakeholder. All right. So that is number one step. Then the second step is to now analyze their potential impact or the support you think you can get from them as regard to the project. That is what you must analyze. Now, this stakeholder, what is their expectation? Okay, this is their expectation. Oh, this is their needs. Now, you now begin to analyze their needs to actually find out first if it relates to the business case of the project. That's number one. Number two, if they are able to impact the project in a way that it can influence the success of the project. So stakeholder analysis in a simple definition is after the stakeholder have been identified, you are now digging deep to find out what is the level of interest this particular stakeholder A have in this project. What is his position in the organization? What is his power? Does he have the authority to make decisions? All these are analysis. All right. So that is what we refer to as what stakeholders analysis. So that you can know very well the level of influence that particular stakeholder have in your project. All right. So it is very key that that is taken care of. So that is stakeholder analysis. Then now there is a major technique for stakeholder analysis is called the power interest grid. The power interest grid. The power interest grid. The power interest grid. So now let's look at the power interest grid. So the power interest grid is a stakeholder analysis technique that can be used by the project manager. Please, I want to explain something. All the explanation I have been given since is in this box. All right. So you can see that the power interest grid is a tactics or a skill that you as a project manager can use to carry out stakeholders analysis. So which means in your carrying out of stakeholders analysis, we have different methods that can be used. You can use the power interest grid method. You can use the salient model method. You can use the power influence method. Then we also have the stakeholders cube method. All right, all these are different methods, but the most popular method of analyzing your stakeholder is your power interest grid. You want to find out, okay, all these stakeholders that I have identified, it is not all of them that will have power. It's not all of them that is the MD. Someone is MD, somebody is deputy MD, somebody is the head of marketing, somebody is the director, somebody is the construction manager, somebody is. So who are those key important people in that organization? So that is why this power interest grid becomes very important. So you can see this power interest grid. You see the vertical axis showing power, the horizontal axis showing the level of interest. So you can see that all these A, B, C, D just represent different stakeholders. So now let's start from the beginning. You can see that in your stakeholders list that you have created in your stakeholders register, you pick the first stakeholder. You ask yourself, from your discussion with these stakeholders earlier, do you think this stakeholder have power or he have interest? All right. You now look at the stakeholder. Let's say, for instance, you pick stakeholder A. All right, as you can see on the screen. You can see that in this stakeholder A, you discover that he has high power under the vertical axis. That's why he's close to this. He has high power. But on the horizontal axis, he has what? Low interest. So this kind of stakeholder you have discussed with, you discover that, well, he has power, but in the project he has what? Low interest. A practical example is, for instance, now you are working with Lagos State Property Development Agency, for example, and you are the project manager for Lagos State Property Development Agency, for example. You know that if, for instance, they are doing project in line with uh, property development of maybe mall, Lagos City Mall for shopping complex, all right, you discover that in that organization there are some people that will not have interest in such projects. Why would they not have interest? Because that project is not directly under that department. So for instance now, people in other department that is not necessarily under department where the project is being carried out, they may have power, but they don't have interest in the project because it is not bringing direct, is not under their domain. I don't know if you understand that. So in such kind of scenario, because they have power, you put them under the first quadrant, which is high power but low interest. All right, let's now say you now pick. So let's now say you now pick stakeholder. Let's now say you now pick stakeholder G and D. You now discover that stakeholder G and D, as you can see on this quadrant, G and D, they don't have power. The power they have is low. They don't have interest in the project because their interest is low. What do? This is the quadrant they are kept. Then you see some stakeholders C and E. You discover that he has high interest in the project. But if you look at it, he has low power in the project. He has high interest, is highly interested. Example of such stakeholder could be the team members or the staff members in that department where the project is being carried out. They have interest in the project because they are the one carrying out the project. But they may not have power to make decision in that department. So you can see them, they are under the high interest but what? Low power. But you now see stakeholder B, H, and F. They may be the directors, the MD, the ones that have both high power and high interest. The stakeholders, the sponsors, those that will release the money for the project, technically they have high power, they have high interest. All right, so you can see that this is like mapping your stakeholders, classifying your stakeholders. So power interest grid is that strategy used by the project manager to actually analyze, classify, re-strategize or restructure all the stakeholders that has been identified in the project so that you can actually tell which and how you should plan for each of those stakeholders. What do I mean? The way you will plan for stakeholder A on the screen is different from the way you plan from stakeholder C and E because they are in different quadrants. The way you plan for stakeholder G and D will be different from the way you plan for stakeholder B, H, and F. They are in different quadrants. All right. Now, when we want to discuss about engagement, I will still come back to this quadrant to explain how you are expected to engage each of these stakeholders. So now let's now move on. Now you have identified, you have classified them using the power interest grid. So now plan stakeholder management is now looking at each of those power, or looking at, so plan stakeholder management is now looking at each of the stakeholders you have put in these different quadrants, and now plan how you intend to engage, monitor, communicate, meet their needs, and make them satisfied. So which means all the stakeholder in this quadrant A, you're going to look at, what do I need to do? You need to put a plan together on how you will communicate with them, how you will meet their expectation, how you will make them happy, all the things that you need to do to make them give you support is the plan. So when we now say plan stakeholder management, you can see we are saying that it is the process of developing what? Appropriate management strategy to what? Effectively engage stakeholders throughout the project lifecycle. What is it based on? Based on the analysis of their needs, interests, and potential impact on success. So which means you have successfully analyzed them in this quadrant. So now you are going to plan which strategy will I use to make sure this stakeholder A, I'm able to meet up, communicate, build a good relationship, and ensure that he's supporting my project 100%. Stakeholder B, H, and F, what strategy do I need to put in place to make sure that I'm able to build good working relationship with him? I'm able to ensure that he supports my project. He gives me all the necessary support I need to succeed in this project. So also you put, that is the plan stakeholder management. So what is the key benefit of this process? Is that it provides a clear, actionable plan to interact with project stakeholders. It provides a clear, actionable plan to interact with project stakeholders so that they can support the project interest. So which means plan stakeholder management, you, the project manager, you're going to ensure you come up with a strategy to actually engage, to discuss, to build rapport, so that at the end they can support your project. So what do you want to achieve by planning stakeholder management for each of those stakeholders is what? Having a stakeholders engagement plan. So what you are looking at the end of the day is that each of these quadrants, you will now have an engagement plan for those stakeholders in quadrant A, engagement plan for those stakeholders in quadrant G and D, engagement plan for those stakeholders in quadrant B, H, and F, engagement plan for those stakeholders in quadrant C and E. That is what the plan stakeholders management. So that becomes your official document for managing and engaging your stakeholder. Remember, you have identified them. You have known their needs, their expectation, all that you need to know about them. Now you are now putting in a plan because you have also divided and be able to determine their interest. Now you now put a plan, strategy that you will use to what? Engage them throughout the project. So that is what? The stakeholder engagement plan. All right. So please also take note. There is also a tool that sometimes is used to ensure that you are having a consistent and continuous support from all your stakeholders according to the plan. And that tool we refer to it as what? The stakeholder engagement assessment matrix. The stakeholder engagement assessment matrix. Now, what is the essence of this tool? Because you want to ensure that there's a continuous engagement. You don't want to give room for lapses. Because you don't want to give room for lapses, you want to ensure that this keep going on. So what do? There is analytical techniques which is helping you as a project manager to be able to identify some stakeholders that you have according to the plan that you have determined earlier, that, oh, this stakeholder, this is how we engage this stakeholder. Oh, this stakeholder, this is how we manage and discuss and build relationship with this stakeholder. Now let's now assume that as the project now started, you now begin to ask yourself, those stakeholders in quadrant A, are you engaging them as expected? So that is why these analytical techniques becomes very key. So you can see what is the analytical techniques all about. He's saying that the current engagement level of all stakeholders needs to be compared to the planned. Do you get it now? So remember, at this point, you have planned how you will communicate with each of those stakeholders. Now, the project have already started. You have started engaging with those stakeholders. But now, analytical technique is saying that you have to quickly recheck, cross-check, verify. All right, the way I'm engaging with these stakeholders now, is that how I planned to engage them? So that I will keep getting the necessary support that I need to have a successful project throughout the project. So that is the reason for this what stakeholders engagement technique. Now, this stakeholder engagement technique has different classes. You can see some stakeholders can become unaware. When we say unaware, we are saying they are unaware of the project and potential impact. It can be classified as resistant. There are some stakeholders later in the project, they are aware of the project and the potential impact, and they will decide to resist the project to change. There are some stakeholders, as time goes on in the project, they become neutral. They are aware of the project, yet they are not ready to support the project, and they are not ready to resist the project. They are just on their own. Then a stakeholder can later become supportive, which means they are aware of the project, they are aware of the potential impact of the project, and they are ready to support the project to have a success. While there are other stakeholder engagement where you have a stakeholder that is aware of the project and potential impact and is actively engaging in ensuring the project is a success. So this stakeholder is the leading stakeholder. So let's now look at what we are looking at. So in a nutshell, the reason for this stakeholder engagement assessment matrix is to quickly compare, because now at this point we have already started engaging our stakeholder. We've started discussing. You started building rapport. But you want to also check that what the way we plan to communicate and build rapport, engage this stakeholder, is that how we are actually engaging them? Are we getting the right result? So that is it. So C in this table is current engagement, current level of engagement. D in this table is planned level of engagement, which can be um, desired level of engagement. So this is the analysis table now. You can see Camino motto. All right. The desired level of engagement according to the plan is that it should be neutral. But you can see that when you now started discussing and engaging him in the project, sending reports, letting him know how the project is going, he become resistant. So at current, as the project started now, he is now resisting the project from succeeding. So you can see this Sanka, the desired level according to the plan. Maybe it's the project sponsor or somebody in the MD is supposed to be leading the project according to the plan because of your discussion with him at the beginning stage. But you now discover that when the project now started, he's only just providing support. He's not championing the cause of the project anymore as expected. That is the current engagement level. You see Sally, the planned engagement level is that he should be supportive. But when the project now started, you now discover that he's now always resisting the project. So also all this. Now, why do you need this as a project manager? So that you can quickly build, resuscitate, re-strategize on how to effectively engage your stakeholder. So which means this Camino that is resistant, it now gives you the opportunity to have one-on-one discussion with a game and say, Ogami, what is going on? Is there any problem? At the initial stage of our project, you're supposed to be neutral, but we have discovered that you are resisting the project. Is there any problem? Is there something we are not doing well? It can open up. It can explain to you. It can talk to you. And also another example like this Saleh, you can look at it. It's supposed to be supporting the project. But now you can see that he's resisting the project. He doesn't want it to succeed. which means it gives you an insight to now go further to have one-on-one engagement with them. It can be in form of a meeting. It can be that you have to call them to actually find out, excuse me, Sir Sale, why is it that you are resisting the project instead of what? Supporting the project. So the essence of this and stakeholders engagement assessment matrix is for you to know which of your stakeholders is no longer supporting the project, which of your stakeholder is losing interest in the project, so that you can revive that relationship, so that you can build again that engagement relationship and re-strategize on how to carry all the stakeholders along. I hope that is clear, Joe. Hello, Joe, is that clear? All right, Joe, is that clear? Just all right. Okay. All right, I get, I get. All right. So let's just move on. So manage stakeholder engagement is the third process, which is actually an executing process. So which means you're already engaging your stakeholder. So you can see now, engage stakeholder in manage stakeholders engagement. So stakeholders engagement, you can see that stakeholder engagement in this context is that there is already a discussion going on. All right, which means at this point we're already talking, which means at this point we're already putting plans together, which means at this point we're already getting things done. That is stakeholders engagement. So which means stakeholders engagement is when we actually start communicating with the stakeholder. When we actually start working, you can see all this definition. I don't want to be reading all this definition. When we actually start communicating with the stakeholder, we are working with the stakeholder, we are discussing with them, we are sending a report, we are communicating very well with every stakeholder. Oh, they are having issues, they are communicating back to you. There's a relationship. That is what managed stakeholder engagement. All right. So at this point of managed stakeholder engagement, what is the implication? What does that actually do for you? It allows the project manager to increase support, minimize resistance from the stakeholders, which can bring a significant chance of increase of project success. So managed stakeholder engagement is at this point, you are communicating as expected. You are sending the memo. You are meeting their needs and expectation. You are working with them. They are having issues. They call you for the issue. You are able to solve that problem, address the issue, which means you are actually building a good working relationship with your stakeholder. That is what manage stakeholders engagement. So the word manage in this context is saying that yes, you are engaging your stakeholder in the right way. So you are actually managing the engagement as expected. So now, excuse me, sir, there is a management strategy for each of our stakeholders. So which means to manage our stakeholders effectively so that there will not be any issue. Remember, we have been able to classify our stakeholders into these different quadrants, which is the power interest grid. Managing your stakeholder becomes key, that there is a standard way you are expected to manage each of your stakeholder. So which means what PMI is saying, or the Project Management Institute, what they are saying is that, excuse me, sir, if you have successfully classified your stakeholder and you have planned how you want to engage each of your stakeholder, how you will manage everything. Now, what they are saying is that all your stakeholders that have high power
but low interest in your project, the best way for you to engage them is to make sure you keep them satisfied. All your stakeholders, as long as you have discovered that they have high power in the project, it may not be that the project is taking place in their department, but they have the power to influence. Maybe it's a board of director, or maybe it's an executive director, but he's not the one directly managing the project, but he's in that company. Such a stakeholder, he has high power. So because he needs to be kept satisfied. That is the best way to manage such stakeholder. Excuse me, sir. Those stakeholders that have key interest in the project because they have high power and they have high interest in the project. What PMI is saying that as a global standard for managing them, they said that we should manage them closely. What does that mean? You must work with them closely, which means on a regular basis, you are working with this set of stakeholders. Then we also have stakeholders that they don't have power at all, neither do they have interest, but they are in that department where project, or they are in that organization, maybe like the cleaner, like the security man, like the drivers or other people, junior staff. What do? Monitor them. So what you are expected to do as a project manager is to monitor them. Why do you have to monitor them? Because they may have relationship with all your key stakeholders. So if they have relationship with all your key stakeholders, they can easily influence your project. That is why you must monitor them. And you can see the level of monitoring, minimal effort. Then the last quadrant, which are those stakeholders that have high interest in the project. Probably they are the HOD of that department where the project is taking place, or they are working in that project and they don't have power at all. The PMI or the PMP standard is that you must keep them informed. So to manage such people, be sending them the mails, be carrying them along on all the activities of what is happening in the project. Oh, if it is to send report, send them report. If you are sending stakeholder in B, C, and BHF report weekly, copy them in the mail so that they will just know what is going on. That is what we should do. So this is a global standard for engaging and managing our stakeholders. All right, so when we discuss stakeholder management, what do we want to achieve? It is possible that we can change any of our skills, we can change any method, we can change the engagement strategy. All right, that becomes you have to say, you want to say something. All right, okay. So that becomes very important, all right, in managing our stakeholder. So you can see that there is no way you can engage your stakeholder, you can manage your stakeholders engagement without communication skill. So you can see that the major skills for managing your stakeholders engagement is what? Your communication skill, your ability to effectively communicate expressly without hassle, your interpersonal and team skill, ability to discuss, to negotiate, ability to resolve conflict, ability to manage meetings. All these are engagement strategy. That's why we call it interpersonal skill. So in your management of your stakeholder, as you are engaging them, which means you are going to be communicating regularly. All right. So which means you must know all the communication skills, the negotiation tactics, all the discussion method that should be used to engage all your stakeholders. Now, as we are managing the stakeholders, discussions are going well. It is also necessary to monitor stakeholders' engagement. What is the essence of monitoring stakeholders' engagement? This is the process of ensuring that your relationship with all your stakeholders are going as planned. And if peradventure is not going as planned, there is room to quickly readjust and adjust your strategies and plan. So monitoring stakeholder engagement is that aspect of the project where you also mirror out areas where engagement is slow, areas where there are lack of feedback as regard to the engagement you are having with your stakeholder, so that you can easily and quickly put them in order. So it is in this process of monitoring that it will help you to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of your stakeholders engagement activities. So that every of your stakeholders that you are engaging, if for instance in the process of monitoring you now discover that there's a particular stakeholder that is not responding to mail or is not attending meetings, or when you say, oh, you want to do a demonstration meeting and you have sent mail to that stakeholder for him to join and he's not joining that meeting, it is your responsibility to find out why that particular stakeholder is not, he doesn't join that meeting. Could it be that he's not getting the mail? Could it be that that is not his communication method he has agreed with you at the beginning? You must find out. So that is why you must monitor all your engagement. Oh, the person you send chat to, did he respond as expected? Why is he not responding as expected? Could it be he doesn't have network or he has traveled? You must know. That is what you must monitor your engagement. Remember, the the concept of stakeholder management is that you are trying to build relationship so that that relationship you are building with them can help you maximize the potential result of the project. So if you have poor relationship with your stakeholders, it may most likely affect your project. Now, relationship in this case may even be your team members. Remember, your stakeholders can be your team members. It can be the government official, everybody or anybody working on the project, as long as they have interest. So if, for instance, your team members you are working with is part of the stakeholders, they are also very important stakeholders. So you must monitor your relation. So if you have people that are working with you and you don't have good relationship with them, it can affect your project. Either you like it or not, one day it will affect the level of trust they have for you as their project manager. And the day you won't expect, they can make your project go flop. So that is why even your team members, your external team members, the people you report to, the external organization that are part of the project, you must build that sweet relationship. All right? That is the key of your stakeholders engagement, because if there is no good relationship, there is no way you can have a effective and efficient communication with all your stakeholders. Please take note, your stakeholders can be your team members, anybody that is interested, can anybody that is interested and that interest is impacted either positively or negatively. They are all what? Your stakeholders in your project. So what do you want to achieve when you are monitoring stakeholders? So that you can get information to know those stakeholders that are disgruntled, to know those stakeholders that are not receiving mails, to know those stakeholders that are not attending meetings. Why are they not attending meetings? But you send them mail. To know those stakeholders that are not supporting you as expected, so that you can iron things out. You can make them have interest again in the project. Yes, you may not be their cause of not supporting the project. It could be that they are fought in a management level, and because they are fought in the management level, they may not answer to you. So you must build a relationship to actually find out and bring their interest back to the project. So that will be all about our stakeholders management for our project. I know you're on the way now, you may not have any question to ask, but if you have any question, please feel free to just drop it in the group so that I can answer it and everybody else will benefit. All right, thank you for your time. All right, thank you.